Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. And I am finally ahead of schedule with recordings. Finally. It's a miracle, actually. They said it couldn't be done, but here I am, kicking ass and not procrastinating. That's me. That's what they say. Kick ass, don't procrast. That's going to be on a shirt. No, it's not. But yeah, I'm ahead by like a week. So I'm coming to you from the future, which will actually feel like the past when you listen to this, because anything that I experience and talk about will have already happened when this comes out. So I don't know. Time is weird. Speaking of weird, and not in a good way, not in a good way, I encountered the most entitled elder today. And I don't judge old people. Like, I can't wait to get old. I can do whatever I want. I can speed, and if someone pulls me over, I can be like, I'm dying. But I just don't know how some people live life the way that they do. I took my little to see the new Zootopia movie. We bought our tickets ahead of time. We reserved our seats, as you do. And when we got there, this older woman and her granddaughter, they were in our seats. And at first I was like, oh, that happens sometimes. Like maybe she thought it was a different seat. So I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I think you're in our seats. And I showed her my phone, with my reservation. And she was like, oh, well, there are seats down there. And I just kind of looked at her. I was like, no, ma'am. And I explained, we reserved these, we paid for these seats. I totally get it if it was a theater that didn't do that, but this one does. It's the only theater we really go to because we can reserve our seats. And I like that. So I'm explaining this to her that, we paid for these seats, we reserved them. She was like, well, in my day, we sat first come, first serve. And I was like, well, cool story, Karen, but this is 2026. And also, if you sit in my reserved seat and I have to sit elsewhere, that means I will be taking someone else's seat, right? And then the entire system is messed up. And that's just not how this works. So I'm explaining this to this woman, and her granddaughter couldn't be older than like maybe 9, right? Not her fault. She's a child. She has no control over grandma. So this woman was not having it, refused to move. And so I mentioned this to the usher, and they were like, yeah, well, there are other seats. And they told us to go sit in other seats. And I am not the kind of person at all to make a scene about this kind of stuff. I don't go to management unless there's like a very, very severe issue. So I was like, okay, well, we will do that. But like, if anyone can just sit wherever they want, then what's the point of reserving your seat? So we went to sit in a separate seat, and wouldn't you fucking know it? Right as the movie's starting, right as it's starting, we're comfy. We're eating our popcorn. We popped open our candy. And this mother of 4 comes over and she's like, hey, I'm so sorry. I think you're in our seats. And I was like, I'm so sorry. We will figure this out. There's a woman over there who took our seats and refused to move. And then we were told to sit elsewhere. So we'll move down and we'll figure this out, which is exactly what I knew would happen. I'm not going to like put out this mom with her children who did the same exact thing we did. Like they did it the right way. So, I mean, we got it all worked out. The grandma was not happy with any of it, but I was like, yeah, that's what happens when you don't follow the rules. Like, I don't know. Even when you buy a ticket at the box office at this theater, they usually have a seat number for you because they're not going to put you somewhere where somebody already reserved, right? So, anyways, I mean, we got through the movie and it was great. I just will never understand people like that. Like, why are people the way they are? I don't get it. But the movie, I will say, I laughed so hard at this one part. And I don't think I'm spoiling Zootopia for anyone listening. So I'm just going to tell you. There's this part toward the end where Hops and Wild, the bunny and the fox, they're chasing after their fugitive. And there's this huge like palace behind them. And it's snowing because they're in the tundra land place. So it's cold. And the fugitive is running toward this giant maze with lighter fluid in his hands. And the maze is in front of the palace. And as you see him like running into the maze and his face is all crazed, suddenly the Shining music started playing. And it was like, Bum, 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 bum. That part where Jack is like, he's like limping through the maze with his axe and he's looking for Danny. I laughed so hard when I saw that scene. I was like, oh my God. I love when writers put things like that into kids' movies for the grown-ups, like little subtle things. But no one else laughed. You guys, it was just me. Either all the adults have terrible taste in movies or it went right over their heads. Anyways, it was the highlight of the movie for me. It was so good. Anytime a spooky reference is made, especially Stephen King, I'm all for it. I'm always in a place of spooky. You guys know this. And if you don't, you should. Hi, welcome to my podcast where I talk about true crime and ghosts. That's why, on the cover art, it says True Crime and Paranormal Podcast, which go hand in hand very well because much of the time, unfortunately, crime can lead to death, which often can result in hauntings. And speaking of hauntings, today's episode is a paranormal one. So if you are, in fact, new here, I alternate between true crime and paranormal episodes, which means next week will be a true crime episode. And today we are exploring the happiest, or maybe spookiest, place on earth. Yes, Disneyland, California, because no one is shocked that yet another place in California is haunted by tragedy. With that being said, let's set the scene. As we all know, Disneyland is designed to feel timeless. And if you've been there, you know the feeling. As you walk through those gates, you smell the churros, you feel the magic, you hear the melodies of your favorite Disney movies playing in the background. I love that feeling. And what I love even more is haunted amusement parks. So when I realized that there's more spooky to this park than just the Haunted Mansion attraction, well, you bet your butt talks, I was going to do an episode on it. Now, I know some of us have heard these stories before. We've heard the lore, we've heard the legends, and maybe even some of the tragedies that made it on the news that have happened there. But do you know some of the other real stories behind them or the ways that these places come alive even when the park is closed? Because today we're going to deep dive into those most active parts of this beloved amusement park with witness testimony from previous employees. That's right. Ticket prices are not the scariest thing here, my friends. Even employees say that this place is just booming with paranormal activity. We are going to explore beyond the rides and into the spaces that Disney never meant to be part of the show. The places where the magic slips, the lights flicker, and the park reveals something much older than fantasy. Because Disneyland may be the happiest place on earth, but not for everyone. But before we start, make sure to click that follow button, like or subscribe, and if you enjoy the episode, be sure to share it with someone who loves Disney and all things spooky. Here we go. We are going to start off with one of my personal favorites, Pirates of the Caribbean. Do you say Caribbean or Caribbean? I say Caribbean for I want to go to the Caribbean, but I say Caribbean when it's like the ride or the movie. Anyways, on this ride, employees have a little ritual that they like to do, and that is every morning before Pirates opens, a cast member walks to the control room microphone and says, "Good morning, George." Why do they say this, you ask? Well, that is because when this place was under construction, a worker named George was building the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction. And according to legend, George was welding a beam high above the ride's burning city scene when tragedy struck. Some versions say that he fell 4 stories to his death. Others claim that a massive beam collapsed and crushed him instantly. Now, of course, Disney, as usual, never confirmed any construction fatality, and no death certificate has ever been found. But something happened in that building because cast members knew that they were not alone in there. The first incidents were pretty subtle. Ride operators would arrive in the morning to find doors standing open that had been locked the night before. The door behind the prison dog with the keys became known as George's door, and it would creak open throughout the day, despite being secured multiple times. Tools would go missing from maintenance areas and reappear in completely different sections of the ride. Boats would stop for no mechanical reason and then start moving again moments later. But it was the surveillance cameras that provided the most unsettling evidence. Cast members monitoring the security feeds began seeing a figure on the screens, a shadowy form moving through areas where no guest could possibly be. That apparition appeared most frequently near Old Bill, the pirate with the cats, and in the storage area beneath the burning city scene. When operators radioed for someone to check these locations, they always found them empty. And then came the mysterious phone calls. The control room phone would ring at really odd hours, especially late at night. And when operators answered, they'd hear nothing but static, or sometimes what sounded like breathing. And the calls always came from inside the house. I'm just kidding. Well, actually, I'm not kidding. They came from within the building, from extension numbers that led to empty backstage areas. One cast member even reported answering a call and hearing a man's voice say, "Check the boats," before the line went dead. And then when she checked the security monitors, a boat had indeed stopped on the track, though it had been running perfectly moments before. Cast members developed rituals to appease George. So every morning, the opening crew member would announce, "Good morning, George," over the PA system. Every night at closing, someone would then say, "Good night, George." Management didn't really require this. They weren't like, "Hey, if you're going to work here, you got to greet George in the morning and say goodnight." But even though they didn't do that, they also didn't stop it, because on the rare occasions when George wasn't greeted, the ride experienced unusual problems throughout the day. Boats would malfunction, audio systems would cut out, lights would flicker in the control tower, just little bizarre things. And they noticed that guests who mocked the legend or expressed disbelief often found themselves victims of George's mischief. Ride breakdowns seemed to happen more frequently when skeptics were aboard. Some visitors reported feeling unseen hands touch their shoulders or tug at their clothing, particularly women riding alone. When they would turn around, no one was there, of course. The most active spot became the area near the hairy-legged pirate dangling his foot over the track. Guests and cast members alike reported feeling watched in that section, sensing a presence. Like they couldn't see this presence, but somehow they just knew it was there. Now, George he wasn't malicious in any way. He never hurt anybody. He simply just wanted acknowledgement. And so cast members came to view him as a protective presence, like a guardian who watched over the ride. And I mean, he helped build it, so of course he wants to make sure things are running smoothly. And employees, they would blame equipment failures on evening crews who forgot to wish George goodnight. And they credited smooth operating days to George being in a good mood. Some longtime employees claim to have actually seen him, like a shadowy figure of a man near the burning tower, always watching, never threatening, just kind of there, just present. And today, cast members still greet George every single morning and they bid him goodnight before they leave. So management may not officially acknowledge George as an entity there, but that's never really stopped the ritual from happening. Because deep in that dark building where pirates sing and cannons roar, something else is listening and he wants to be remembered. So they're going to greet him because everyone wants an easy day at work. So I wanted to start with that one because I love that ride. I love that movie. And it holds a special place in my heart because the first time that I went to Disneyland, I think I was probably 8 or 9, and I was with my sisters and my parents. And at some point, like after the ride or something, we all had to go to the bathroom. So we're getting off of Pirates. It's crowded. Everyone has to pee. And my dad, who loved to just like make up weird slogans and weird things to say, my dad's like, "Come on, we got to find Captain Jack's urination station." And me and my other sister, my middle sister, start cracking up. And my mom's laughing. My oldest sister's laughing, but she's like, "Dad, stop. Oh my God." And so that, of course, just makes him say it louder. So he's repeating Captain Jack's urination station. And we're just following him, trying to find the bathroom, which is through the gift shop, as always, because every ride has to end in a gift shop so that kids can annoy their parents and say, "Can I please, please, please have this?" And their parents are like, "No, we took out a second mortgage just to come here." But anyways, that's one of my favorite childhood memories. Next up on our list is the Haunted Mansion. Of course it is. The Haunted Mansion claims to house 999 happy haunts, but some spirits inside aren't really part of the show, and they're not happy at all, to be honest. Now, the Haunted Mansion opened at Disneyland in 1969, and it was designed to be just a playful journey through a Victorian estate filled with theatrical ghosts and ghouls. It became one of Disney's most beloved attractions. I love this ride as well. It is definitely one of my favorites. But over the decades, a disturbing trend started to emerge in the ride. You see grieving families who were determined to give their loved ones an eternal home in their favorite place began secretly scattering human ashes throughout the ride, which you can't do that. That's not allowed. And despite explicit prohibitions and security measures, the practice actually became so frequent that Disney maintenance crews developed a code name for it. It was called HEPA. They would get out their little radios and they'd be like, over, we got a HEPA cleanup. And they had to have a special vacuum. All the special things had to be deployed regularly to remove human remains from the ride. One custodian told reporters that the Haunted Mansion probably contained so much human ash that it wasn't even funny anymore. Like at first it was like, haha, these people are kind of kooky, you know? And then it was like, no, 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 this is a health hazard. You cannot do this. Like, no one wants to be riding and then whipped around in their little seat with human remains, ash, like flying into their mouth when they're laughing or talking or just enjoying themselves on the ride. That is a nightmare situation. I don't want human remains on that ride. Don't do that. So the ride designed to simulate hauntings had become genuinely haunted by people who refused to leave. Because as hard as you might try to get those ashes out of there, they're ashes, guys. There's going to be some left behind. Like there's no way to get all of them out. And due to this very unusual thing that people would do, the most frequently reported phenomenon involves a small boy, unfortunately, a child ghost, that is seen primarily on the ride security camera monitors. Cast members reviewing surveillance footage noticed him appearing in various sections of the attraction, always alone and always seeming to enjoy himself. He would be visible in the stretching room, the ballroom scene, or near the exit sometimes. But the unsettling part comes when operators check those locations in person and the areas are completely empty. No child is ever found. Yet the boy continued and continues to appear on the cameras, caught from multiple angles, visible for just like seconds before vanishing from the screens. The sightings became so consistent that cast members gave him a name and began tracking his appearances. Some believe that he was one of the children whose ashes had been scattered in the ride. Probably, a young guest whose dying wish was to remain in the Haunted Mansion forever or just at Disneyland. So his presence wasn't really threatening. He seemed to be doing exactly what he'd wanted, experiencing his favorite attraction for all of eternity. Other phenomena occurred through the attraction as well. Cast members working alone after hours reported hearing children's laughter echoing through the empty corridors, the sound moving from room to room as if kids were running through the mansion playing. And when they would go to investigate it, they found no source. The laughter would just stop abruptly the moment that they entered the room, only to resume again somewhere else in the building. And it wasn't the recorded laughter from the ride's audio track. That's a very different laugh. If you've been on the ride, you know what I mean. This was a live, spontaneous, and impossible children's laughter. And then there's stuff that happens in the seance room, where Madame Leota's floating head recites incantations. Cast members have reported really bizarre occurrences involving the prop spell book that's beneath her. The book was always positioned very carefully each night before closing, but morning crews would frequently find it moved to different locations within the scene. Sometimes it appeared on the opposite side of the room, and other times it was turned to different pages. Security footage never captured anyone entering to move it. The book simply just relocated on its own, as if Madame Leota's recorded spell was actually working, summoning something into the theatrical space. Now, the exit area is active as well. This is where, guests disembark from their doom buggies and they walk through the crypt. This became a hot spot for unexplained activity. Multiple guests and cast members reported seeing a small child standing near the exit crying. And when approached to, offer help, the child would just vanish instantly. The description was always consistent. It was a young boy, perhaps, 6 years old, maybe 7 years old, dressed in clothing that seemed decades out of date and visibly distressed and tearful. Some witnesses believed that they were seeing the spirit of a child whose mother had scattered his ashes against Disney's wishes, and that his ghost was trapped and confused, unable to understand why he couldn't leave. Which is so sad. Oh my God. I couldn't imagine. Yeah, of course you want to ride your favorite ride for all of eternity, but you want to be able to leave. So this was pretty unsettling. And what's even more disturbing about this whole thing, you guys, is the incidents involving guests who were scattering ashes actually getting caught in the act. People would see them doing it on the camera, and then security would have to detain them and explain the health code violations and just the disrespect to other guests. And then they would have to be escorted from the park. But cast members started noticing a pattern when this would happen. They said that on nights following confirmed ash scatterings, the ride would experience unusual technical difficulties. Doom buggies would stop for no actual mechanical reason, and the audio tracks would skip or just play backwards, which that is scary. Lights would flicker throughout the attraction, and it was as if the building itself was reacting to the intrusion or maybe angry at being transformed from an entertainment area into a cemetery. The Haunted Mansion still welcomes thousands of guests daily. It's 999 happy haunts performing their theatrical scares with mechanical precision, but cast members, they know the truth. And some of the spirits inside of that ride, they are not animatronic. And some of them were not even invited. Some are children who just wanted to stay in the place that they loved most, but ended up being trapped there on an eternal ride that never lets them leave. So that is the Haunted Mansion's haunted history. Next up on our list is a pretty tragic one. It's pretty sad. It is the Matterhorn tragedy. On the Matterhorn bobsleds, there is a section of track that cast members call Dolly's Dip. They try not to walk around it alone, especially at night, because this section of the track is definitely haunted. And that is because on January 3rd, 1984, Dolly Young took her seat in a Matterhorn bobsled for what would have and should have been just a thrilling ride down the mountain. She was 31 years old and visiting Disneyland with her friends. But that particular day, as the bobsled climbed the track and began its twisting descent through the artificial mountain, something went horribly wrong. Dolly was thrown from her seat, and before anyone could react, an oncoming bobsled struck her. She was decapitated and she died instantly. Investigators examined the ride mechanics exhaustively, but never determined exactly what caused her restraint to fail. Of course, the seatbelt should not have come undone, but unfortunately, these things do happen. The safety systems, they said, had been inspected and passed just hours before. Yet somehow, Dolly Young fell out of the bobsled, and the Matterhorn became more than just an attraction. It became a horrific site of tragedy. Now, because of this, within weeks of Dolly's death, cast members working at the Matterhorn began experiencing phenomenon that they could not explain. The first reports came from the closing crew. The employees who walked the track each night after the ride shut down, inspecting for damage or debris, they had to traverse the entire route on foot, climbing through the mountain's hollow interior, walking the narrow pathways beside the track. Now, these walks were already kind of eerie. They're a little creepy. It's silent, it's dark, but the section where Dolly had died, they said something felt very, very off there, very different. Cast members reported an overwhelming sense of being watched and that the temperature would drop noticeably in that specific area, even though the rest of the mountain remained the same. Some described it as walking into a pocket of cold air that just shouldn't be there. Others felt an inexplicable sadness wash over them, like a crushing grief that appeared without warning and then vanished the moment they left that section of the track. Several cast members refused to walk Dolly's Dip alone, always insisting on a partner, even though the company policy didn't require it. And then a little bit later came the eerie sounds. Late night maintenance crews working inside the mountain reported hearing a woman's scream echoing through the hollow interior, but only in that one section. The scream would last just a few seconds and then cut off abruptly. And when crews radioed security to check if a guest was trapped inside, they always found the mountain empty and sealed. The scream had no source, no explanation. It just existed in that space, replaying like a recording that no one could turn off. And while less common, physical manifestations also happened. Cast members walking the track at night reported seeing a woman's figure standing beside the rails, always in the same spot, always facing the direction that the bobsleds traveled. She appeared to have a dark silhouette, never fully solid and never clearly detailed. When they approached or called out to the figure, it would just vanish instantly, leaving nothing but a really horrible and overwhelming feeling of sorrow. Guests riding the Matterhorn sometimes even report strange experiences in that section as well, though most of them don't really know the location's tragic history. They'd describe sudden cold spots while riding through certain areas or the feeling of someone sitting behind them when their bobsled was only half full. Some guests captured photographs inside the mountain that, when developed, showed unexplained shadows or light anomalies in the background, always near Dolly's Dip. Cast members developed an unspoken respect for that section of track, and they would acknowledge Dolly quietly as they passed. A small nod or a whispered greeting. Not a ritual like George at Pirates of the Caribbean, but a personal gesture of just recognition. Just saying, like, hi, Dolly, or smiling and nodding as they walked past. The phenomenon never stopped completely, but longtime employees noticed that they seemed less intense when Dolly was acknowledged, as if she simply just needed to know that she hadn't been forgotten. The Matterhorn still towers over Disneyland. It's a great ride. It's thrilling. It's fun. We all love the Yeti. Its white peaks gleam in that California sun. I mean, you know that ride from a mile away. But cast members know that one section of the track holds more than just memories. And unfortunately, Dolly's death was not the only one to happen on this ride. There actually was another death that took place on the Matterhorn. In May of 1964, 15-year-old Mark Maples was riding the Matterhorn when he unbuckled his restraint and stood up for God knows why during the ride. And he fell from the bobsled and suffered fatal injuries days later. This was the first recorded fatality in Disneyland history. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe some of the energy that's trapped there isn't just Dolly. Maybe it's Mark too. So, that is the more tragic history at Disneyland. That one's very, very sad and very well known as well. Next up, we have probably the most active place in the entire park, and that is the Golden Horseshoe Saloon. At the Golden Horseshoe Saloon in Frontierland, cast members say that there are two names they don't like to mention out loud, and that is the blonde girl and Freddie. The Golden Horseshoe opened with Disneyland in 1955, and it was designed as a Wild West saloon featuring, live entertainment and comedy. And for decades, performers sang and danced on its stage while guests enjoyed the Old West atmosphere. The venue became legendary for its shows, but it also became known amongst cast members for something a little bit darker. According to staff legend, a longtime employee named Freddie worked at the Golden Horseshoe for years. He was beloved by coworkers and guests, but unfortunately, one day while he was working his usual shift, Freddie suffered a massive heart attack and he died in the building. But as we know, he never truly left. Which, my God, could you imagine like dying and then waking up at work? That is your own personal hell if that happens. My goodness. But I will say, if I had to die somewhere, a place with endless churros, Dole Whip, rides, and toys doesn't sound too bad. I mean, an office would be worse, but this isn't about me. We will talk a little bit more about Freddie, but first, I want to tell you guys about the blonde girl. The identity of the blonde girl remains more mysterious, but cast members believe that she may have been a young performer or maybe even a guest who met an untimely end at the saloon. What is certain is that both of these spirits remain there and that both make their presence very known, but in very different ways. The blonde girl appears most frequently on the main stage, particularly when the saloon is closed or during quieter periods between shows. Cast members describe her as very playful. She's not frightening. She's been seen running across the stage, and she appears to be somewhat translucent and quick, darting behind curtains that rustle and move despite no breeze in the very climate controlled building. Some performers who set up for shows have actually noted that curtains will billow and sway as if someone is hiding behind them, like playing a game of hide and seek. The most compelling encounter, though, came from a former cast member named Alex, who worked at the Golden Horseshoe for several years. According to Alex, who actually has a YouTube channel, it's Alex the Historian, one afternoon, he and a coworker were discussing the saloon's ghost stories when a little girl approached them and she was wearing what seemed like not really appropriate clothing for the time. This was, I think he said, in 2009. So this little girl looked up at them and she asked them if the place was haunted, claiming she had just seen a ghost inside. And Alex and his coworker reassured her that everything was fine and that the little girl wouldn't need to be worried about anything. So she returned to her family's table to finish eating. But when that family was preparing to leave later that evening, Alex noticed something really weird. The family was leaving the restaurant, but only with their son. There was no daughter with them. So, very confused, Alex approached the parents and he was like, "Oh, what about your daughter? Like where's your little girl?" And the parents looked at him like he had five heads. They were like, we don't have a daughter. We came here with our son." And Alex was like, "Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry. Have a great day." Like that was weird. He had heard like rumors of the hauntings, but he didn't know about the little girl. He'd heard about Freddie mostly. So the little blonde girl had actually interacted with him directly. She interacted with the staff, asking questions, holding a conversation, and then just completely disappeared. Now, Alex has other stories as well. He discusses his experience as a Disney employee, as well as his father's experience as an 18 and a half year Disney employee. So they have seen quite a bit of activity. And according to them, Freddie's presence manifests a little bit differently. So let's get into Freddie. According to Alex, while the blonde girl stays playful and curious, Freddie is a little more chaotic. Cast members blame him for unexplained technical difficulties during shows, sound systems malfunctioning at very crucial moments, and stage lights flickering or shutting off entirely. Performers have reported feeling sudden cold spots while on stage or sensing someone standing in the wings watching them, though when they look, there's no one there. The backstage areas became particularly active with Freddie's energy. Cast members entering dressing rooms or storage areas would find items moved overnight, furniture rearranged, or doors that had been locked being open. Some employees even reported hearing footsteps pacing back and forth in empty rooms above the saloon. So they often hear that steady rhythm of someone walking with a purpose back and forth upstairs, even though those spaces are unoccupied at the time. Those footsteps would continue for several minutes and then stop abruptly, as if Freddie had completed whatever he needed to do and, he was done pacing. One pattern, though, emerged very clearly over time, and that was when cast members acknowledged Freddie's presence, spoke to him respectfully, or thanked him for his years of service at the Golden Horseshoe. That chaotic activity would diminish quite a bit. Shows would run very smoothly, equipment functioned properly. It seemed that Freddie, kind of like George and Dolly, of course, just wanted recognition. I mean, he'd spent years working at that venue, and his death, while very tragic and sudden, it hadn't changed his attachment to that place. He wanted to be remembered as part of the Golden Horseshoe family. Alex did have another story about sometimes, Freddie would get a little rude. They had a female coworker who got locked in Freddie's room upstairs. And that room that they call Freddie's room made everyone very, very uncomfortable because the door would randomly slam shut, locking people inside. Alex mentions on his channel how after that female coworker had been locked in, she emerged with scratches and was really distressed. And then management told them that they weren't allowed to go in there alone anymore and they had to use the buddy system. So that's a little scary. I don't know why Freddie would do that, but maybe he doesn't like people in his space. I don't know. Now, the blonde girl and Freddie do sometimes seem to interact with each other. On rare occasions, cast members will witness both phenomena simultaneously. Curtains moving on stage while footsteps echo from upstairs when no one's there. Or the blonde girl's figure darting across the stage while cold spots manifest in the wings. Some employees speculate that maybe the two spirits knew each other, or perhaps they just connected in the afterlife. We don't know. Today, the Golden Horseshoe continues hosting shows. Its stage, is alive with music and laughter, just as Walt intended. But between performances, when the saloon sits really quiet and empty, cast members sometimes glimpse blonde hair disappearing behind curtains, or they hear footsteps pacing overhead in those rooms that hold nothing but furniture and silence and props. The blonde girl and Freddie remain eternal cast members of that show that truly never ends. But they are not the only ones who like to visit the saloon in the afterlife. While working late night closing shifts at the Golden Horseshoe restaurant, Alex learned that two specific booths carried a long standing reputation among cast members, and they were known simply as Walt and Roy's booths. According to internal lore passed quietly between employees, when Walt Disney attended shows at the Golden Horseshoe, he favored the booth on the right-hand side of the stage, and his brother Roy, when present, would sit in the booth opposite of him on the left-hand side. Over time, these locations became informally named after the brothers, and cast members continued to refer to them that way years after Walt's death. One night, while cleaning the restaurant after closing, Alex noticed something unusual. He had already stacked the chairs throughout the venue, placing them upside down on tables, in that specific interlocking pattern used by night staff. If you ever worked in a restaurant, you put the chairs up so that you can sweep beneath it. And so he was doing this, and as he prepared to leave, he glanced toward Walt's booth, and he realized that the chairs there had not been stacked. Now, assuming it was a simple oversight, he went back up and he stacked the chairs properly, and then he returned downstairs. Moments later, though, he heard movement behind him. When he looked back toward the booth, the chairs were no longer stacked the way he had left them. One chair had been pulled forward and placed directly against the railing, positioned as if someone were sitting there looking out over the restaurant. Obviously unsettled, Alex returned to the booth, restacked the chairs, and went back down once more. But again, he heard rustling behind him. So he turned back around, and when he checked the booth a second time, the chair had been moved back to the railing in the same position, facing outward as though deliberately placed there, looking over the restaurant again. There was no one else in the building. The restaurant had been closed, the doors were locked, and other cast members had already left to cash out in a separate building. There were no drafts, no loose furniture that could possibly lift a chair and place it deliberately there, and no plausible explanation for the repeated repositioning. Adding to the strange atmosphere, cast members working early morning shifts often also report another phenomenon tied to the Golden Horseshoe. As they prepare the restaurant for the day, they would suddenly smell cigar smoke. Very strong, very distinct, and unmistakable. despite the building having been empty overnight and despite not being allowed to smoke in there anymore. Now, of course, later research tells us that Walt Disney was known to smoke cigars in the Golden Horseshoe in the early mornings before the park opened. He would have breakfast at the Carnation Cafe, then walk to the Golden Horseshoe to smoke a cigar and look out over Frontierland and the rivers of America as Disneyland came to life. That scent, the cast member said, would appear without any warning, linger briefly, and then fade away, leaving behind the sense that someone had been there watching them smoking a cigar. So, yeah, that is by far one of the most active places at Disneyland. And now, when I go back, I have to keep an eye out for the blonde girl and Freddie, and of course, Walt and maybe even Roy. Who knows? Next up, we have somewhere that's not in the park, but directly tied to it, and that is the Disneyland Hotel. Now, going back to Alex, the employee I was just speaking about, long before he ever worked for Disneyland himself, Alex spent late nights at the Disneyland Hotel waiting for his father to finish his work because his father, remember, worked there for 18 and a half years. He had been employed in the hotel division for, nearly 2 decades, often working graveyard shifts. So for Alex, the hotel lobby became a familiar place. It was quiet, empty, and he said sometimes unsettling in ways that he couldn't explain at the time. One area stood out immediately to him as a child and to his father, and that was the downstairs lobby restroom. If you guys have ever been inside the hotel, you know that to get to the restroom in the lobby, you have to go downstairs, which I already don't like. I don't like that at all. But one of those late nights, Alex mentioned, sometime around 1 a.m., he entered the restroom alone. And while inside, he distinctly heard someone else enter the bathroom. He heard footsteps, the sound of nearby urinal being used, and then running water at the sink. Nothing unusual, except for maybe the hour. But the lobby had been empty when he went in. So he figured, someone had come in to use the restroom late at night. And when he exited the stall, the sink was still running, but no one was there. So, being really confused, he opened the restroom door and looked up the staircase, expecting to see whoever had just left because they had just been in there. The stairwell was completely empty, no footsteps, no door sounds, no explanation. Weeks later, the same restroom produced another experience. Again, Alex heard someone enter while he was inside, but this time there was whispering. Low voices, indistinct, close enough to hear, but not to understand. When he stepped out of the stall, the voices abruptly stopped, and the room was empty. Now, later on, Alex learned that this restroom did have a reputation. When he mentioned the incidents to his father confirmed that guests had been reporting really strange encounters there for years, specifically the sensation of someone being present when no one could be found. Guests would insist that someone had just been there only to discover the empty space moments later. Alex's father, Joe, has also had his own experiences. During his years working the graveyard shift at the Disneyland Hotel, Joe routinely monitored the lobby through security cameras. And more than once, he and other cast members noticed what appeared to be a dark figure standing at the far end of the lobby, near one of the large support columns. Thinking it was a guest, someone would go to investigate, but no one was ever there. On one occasion, Joe himself watched the figure move, walking toward him before dissipating completely, just fading into the air. There was no sound, no door opening, no place it could have even gone. Another recurring legend centered on the Frontier Tower, particularly the 7th floor. Guests frequently reported seeing a little girl wandering the halls, crying softly or staring straight through them, as if they weren't really there. Staff came to refer to her as the Peppermint Girl because her presence was often accompanied by a very strong scent of peppermint, appearing suddenly, lingering, and then vanishing without a trace. Now, what's interesting is during COVID's shutdown, when the property was largely empty, security guards assigned to patrol the building reported seeing the little girl themselves. When operations resumed, they told Joe that they were relieved that the staff had returned because they hadn't been alone in that building and they were all freaked out. One guard even showed Joe a photograph that they claimed captured this little girl's image. And this moment left him deeply unsettled. One of Joe's other most disturbing experiences occurred in the hotel tunnels. So, if you guys don't know, these hotels have like a tunnel system for cast members and things like that. And while working a night shift, he spotted an elderly coworker walking ahead of him underground. So, Joe called out to the man several times and kind of quickened his pace. He was like really confused by the lack of response. The coworker continued walking. He turned a corner and he was like calling out to the coworker, but the coworker disappeared. Later on, Joe mentioned seeing him to a supervisor. And this supervisor was like, that's impossible. Because the man that Joe had followed was actually not at work that evening because he was in surgery, undergoing his third heart bypass. Shortly afterward, unfortunately, the coworker passed away. Now, Joe, he was able to describe exactly what the man had been wearing when he saw him, and that detail, more than anything else, convinced everyone that something profoundly unexplained had occurred. A supervisor later admitted that he never believed in ghosts until that night, because how would he have known what that employee was wearing if he wasn't even there? It's like his spirit ended up back at work. Very bizarre. So, yeah, between the bathroom encounters, the shadowed lobby figure, the peppermint girl, and the apparition of a coworker who had already crossed over, both Joe and his son Alex came to the unsettling conclusion that the Disneyland Hotel is never really empty, even when it appears to be. Now, if you guys like that one, hold on to your butts for this next one. We've got a few more to go. Up next, we have Space Mountain. Single riders on Space Mountain sometimes find that they are not riding alone. There is a man with red hair sitting beside them who wasn't there when the ride started. So, Space Mountain opened at Disneyland in 1977, bringing the indoor roller coaster thrills to Tomorrowland with its pitch black darkness and simulated journey through outer space. This attraction became instantly popular and very famous for its single rider line, which allowed solo guests to fill empty seats and experience shorter wait times. But sometime in the late 1970s, according to cast member accounts, a large man with distinctive red hair and a reddened face died while riding Space Mountain. The exact circumstances remain unclear, possibly a heart attack or other medical emergency during the intense experience, but Disney never officially confirmed the death. But that didn't stop cast members reporting encounters with a ghostly figure who became known as Mr. One Way, named for his preference for appearing in the single rider line and occupying empty seats beside solo passengers. The first reports came from single riders who boarded the rocket alone, specifically requesting the single rider option, only to sense that someone was sitting in the seat beside them during the ride. In the complete darkness of Space Mountain's interior, guests couldn't see their companion, but they felt the presence distinctly. The seat beside them felt occupied, and they sensed the body heat and the proximity of somebody next to them. Some reported feeling the rocket shift with additional weight when the ride ended. And then the lights would come on at the unloading area, and the seat was always empty. No one was ever there. As accounts accumulated, witnesses began describing consistent physical details. Those who caught glimpses of Mr. One Way during brief moments of light or illumination at the end of the ride described a large man with bright red hair and an unusually flushed, reddened face. He appeared solid and real during those split seconds of visibility, wearing clothing that seemed decades out of date. Then, as guests turned to look directly at him, or as the rocket pulled fully into the lit unloading station, he would vanish completely. The seat that had felt occupied throughout the entire ride was suddenly empty. Cast members who were operating the attraction reported their own encounters as well. Operators monitoring the ride from the control tower claimed to see a figure matching Mr. One Way's description, boarding rockets in the single rider line clearly visible on security cameras. They would watch him take his seat, the safety bar would lower, the rocket would launch, but then when that same rocket returned to the station, the seat was empty. The mysterious rider had disappeared somewhere in the darkness, and when operators reviewed surveillance footage, the figure would be visible boarding but never visible exiting. And then the locker room also became another hotspot for Mr. One Way's activity. Cast members changing before or after shifts reported seeing a large man with red hair standing in the locker room, often near the benches or the lockers. He'd be visible for just a moment, solid enough to seem like another employee, but then vanish when he was witnessed. Some cast members reported making eye contact with him and seeing his reddened face very clearly, even beginning to greet him as a coworker before realizing that he wasn't real. The encounter would leave them very shaken, standing in an empty locker room that held another person just seconds before. Cast members developed an unspoken awareness of Mr. One Way, and they would notice him on monitors, spot him in the locker room, or hear guests describe him after their rides. Unlike Freddie or George, Mr. One Way didn't seem to want any kind of acknowledgement or interaction. He just wanted to keep riding Space Mountain over and over again, eternally experiencing the attraction in the darkness. And he could just be another thrill seeker, enjoying the ride that he loved so much he never left. Space Mountain still launches rockets into the darkness every few minutes, carrying thousands of guests throughout the simulated space. But single riders climbing into their seats alone might want to remember that Mr. One Way could be joining them. And the next time your girl rides Space Mountain, I will absolutely ride solo and let you guys know. Now, these next few stories moving forward are pretty tragic, but we are going to end on a light note. In Disneyland's Rivers of America, cast members sometimes see ripples in the water that move against the current, following a pattern that really shouldn't exist. The Rivers of America opened with Disneyland in 1955, just like the Golden Horseshoe. It is a man-made waterway surrounding Tom Sawyer's Island where guests can explore caves, forts, and wilderness trails. It's one of my favorite sections of the park. It's so fun. This island became a favorite destination for families, accessible only by raft across the river. But in the 1970s, two teenage brothers made a very fatal decision. These brothers decided that they were going to hide away on Tom Sawyer's Island until after the park closed, and they planned to spend the night in the caves as an adventure. But when they realized that cast members were locking down the island for the evening, panic began to set in. And rather than reveal themselves and face the consequences, the older brother decided that they should just swim back to the mainland under the cover of darkness. Now, he was a strong swimmer and he believed that he could tow his younger brother across the way. So they entered the water together, and the older brother swam with determination, pulling his younger sibling behind him. But halfway across the river, something went terribly wrong. He could not make it all the way, and the younger brother ended up drowning in those dark waters. His body was not found until the following morning. The older brother did survive, but he was completely traumatized by the loss. Within weeks of the drowning, cast members working the Rivers of America began noticing very unusual activity in the water. The river had really predictable currents and controlled flows because of the mechanical systems that move the water in specific patterns. But operators started seeing the ripples and the water disturbances that defied these patterns, moving independently against the current as if something was swimming through the water. The ripples would appear near the spot where the boy had drowned, creating wake patterns, identical to those that a swimmer would make, moving steadily toward Tom Sawyer's Island, as if someone was still trying to complete that fatal crossing. The most chilling reports, though, came from cast members who worked late shifts closing down Tom Sawyer's Island after the last guests had departed. They'd be doing final sweeps of the caves and the fort, ensuring that no one remained hidden when they would hear sounds coming from the shoreline. The distinct noise of someone pulling themselves from the water onto the rocks. So they would rush over to investigate, concerned that someone had fallen into the river, only to find that the shore was completely empty. The docks would be wet as if someone had just climbed out of the water, but there was never any person there. Cast members also developed a very somber respect for that section of the river. They would acknowledge the tragedy quietly when working in that area, a brief moment of recognition for the boy who never made it across. And unlike the playful spirits at some of the other attractions, like the blonde girl, this presence carried genuine sorrow. He is not mischievous or protective, he's just lost, still trying to complete his journey that ended in tragedy. The rivers of America still flow peacefully to this day, but cast members know to watch the water very carefully because when ripples move against the current and the river grows inexplicably cold, a boy is still swimming and fighting for his life toward a shore that he will never reach. So this one is definitely more devastating. Now, this next one is another devastating story, but it is something that happened there and something that people tend to experience. So let's talk about the monorail. Late at night at Disneyland, monorail pilots tend to see a shadow. It's usually running on the track ahead of the train, and it's always just beyond the beam of their headlights. Now, if you don't know, the Disneyland monorail opened in 1959, so a few years after they opened the park. It was America's first daily operating monorail system, gliding silently above Tomorrowland and providing transportation between the park and the Disneyland Hotel. Unfortunately, on June 17th, 1966, a tragic accident shattered the monorail's safety record. A 19-year-old high school graduate named Thomas Guy Cleveland was visiting Disneyland with his friends during the grad night celebrations. Late in the evening, though, Cleveland decided that he was going to sneak back into the park by climbing onto the monorail track, planning to walk or run along the beam to bypass the entrance gates. He was spotted by a cast member who immediately radioed for the monorail to stop. But unfortunately, the message came too late, and the train came around the curve. The pilot was not able to see Cleveland on the track ahead in the darkness, and the monorail struck him. Now, along with Mark Maples, this became one of the first people to die in a Disneyland attraction accident. This tragedy obviously devastated his family and completely shocked everyone who worked the monorail system, who went to the park, just the entire community. But within months of Cleveland's death, the monorail pilots working late night shifts actually began reporting unsettling encounters on the tracks. The most consistent phenomenon included seeing a human shadow or figure running along the monorail beam ahead of the train, always staying just beyond the reach of the headlights. Pilots would catch glimpses of the running form in their peripheral vision, or they would see it briefly, like illuminated as they rounded the curves, but then the figure would vanish before the headlights could fully illuminate it. The sightings always occurred in the same general area where Cleveland had been struck, particularly on the stretch between Tomorrowland and the hotel. Pilots experienced more than just visual encounters, though. Some of them reported feeling the monorail shudder or vibrate as if passing over something on the track, a sensation identical to what the pilot on that fatal night had felt. Yet when they stopped to investigate, the beam is always completely clear. So, the psychological impact, it's very severe for these pilots and it forces them to stop and inspect the tracks, even though they know that they're empty because they do not want another accident, yet somehow they are reliving that trauma that had happened years before they even joined the company. Technical anomalies accompany these sightings as well. The monorail's motion sensors and safety systems occasionally trigger warnings when passing through Cleveland's section of the track, indicating that an obstruction or presence is on the beam. And then, of course, when they investigate it, it doesn't exist. Communication systems would experience brief static or interference in that area as well. Emergency brakes would engage unexpectedly, forcing pilots to override them and continue. All systems showing false positive for obstacles that aren't even there. It's as if Cleveland's final moments had imprinted themselves not just on the location, but on the technology itself, creating phantom echoes that trigger safety systems designed to prevent the exact tragedy that he had experienced. But thankfully, cast members developed protocols around these encounters. So when pilots report seeing the running shadow, supervisors would note it in logs and then they would check the track thoroughly and offer support. Now, again, unlike some of the other playful spirits at the other attractions, Cleveland's presence carried no mischief or desire for acknowledgement. He's just kind of trapped there. It's like a residual haunting. It's an endless loop, forever running along the beam, which is really devastating, very sad. Now, the monorail system is still there to this day. It glides gently above Disneyland, carrying guests between the park and the hotels, just as it did in 1959. But now, pilots late at night know to watch the tracks very carefully. And they learn to trust their instruments, but also trust what they see in the shadows because you just never know. Unfortunately, this brought a whole new perspective to how people might try and get into that park. A very tragic story. Now, this last one, like I said, we are going to end on a high note. This one is a little more lighthearted and has to do with the designer of Disneyland himself. This one is known as Walt's Light. If you've been to Disneyland, then you know that on Main Street, USA, just past the entrance tunnels and across from City Hall, stands a brick firehouse that looks like every other charming Victorian building in Disneyland. But this one has a second floor window and a lamp that burns all day and all night. It is never extinguished, never allowed to go dark. Cast members know what this light means. It's not decoration. The spirit who refuses to leave it is Walt Disney. Even though Walt died in 1966, if you ask any longtime cast member, they will tell you the same thing. They call him Uncle Walt, and they say that he never really left his park. Walt Disney personally designed that apartment above the firehouse as his private sanctuary within the park. When Disneyland opened in July of 1955, he needed a place to escape the crowds and to just watch his dream come alive from above. He would also use it to host visiting dignitaries and Hollywood celebrities away from the public view. That apartment was very small but very elegant and decorated with Victorian furnishings that matched the main street's turn of the century charm. Walt would spend countless hours there during construction and throughout the park's early years, often working late into the night on new attractions and expansions. Whenever he arrived to the park, he would climb those narrow stairs, light the lamp in the window, and then cast members below would know that Walt was there. So that lamp became his signature. It was a beacon that told everyone that Walt Disney was in the park. Now, as we know, unfortunately, on December 15th in 1966, Walt Disney died at St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, California. He was just across the street from his studio. He was unfortunately only 65 years old, but lung cancer had taken him very, very quickly, just 10 days after his initial hospitalization. Now, this man, who had spent 11 years building and perfecting Disneyland, who had walked every inch of his park, knew every single cast member by name. And he was suddenly gone. The news completely devastated employees and fans worldwide. And within days of his death, the lamp in the firehouse apartment was extinguished for the first time in years. The apartment sat very dark and very silent, And cast members walked past the firehouse with heavy hearts, glancing up at the dark window where his lamp had always burned very brightly. But that darkness would not last too long, because just a few weeks after Walt's death, a maintenance worker was assigned to clean up the apartment. It had been sealed since his passing and very untouched, gathering dust. So she climbed up the stairs with her cleaning supplies, unlocked the door, and she stepped into the silent room. Everything had remained exactly as Walt had left it. The coworker dusted the furniture, swept the floors, and as she was preparing to leave, she noticed that the lamp was lit. She didn't remember it being on when she arrived, but assumed that maybe another employee had turned it on. So she switched it off, locked the apartment, and walked back down to Main Street. But when she reached the street and she looked back, there was the lamp glowing in the window. Very confused, she climbed back up the stairs, unlocked the door, and turned the lamp off again. She made sure it was completely off this time, and she checked the switch twice. Then she left and locked the door behind her. She then went back down to the street to go home, and she looked back up, and the lamp was on again. Now, understandably, her heart was racing, and she went back up a third time, and she just stood there in the apartment staring at the lamp that she had just turned off. And as she watched in absolute silence and bewilderment, the lamp switch turned itself, clicking, and a warm amber light flooded the room. And that woman never tried to turn that lamp off again. Word spread very quickly among cast members, and some dismissed it as just faulty wiring or an overactive imagination born from grief. But then the footsteps started. Cast members who would close Main Street shops late at night reported hearing slow, deliberate footsteps walking across the apartment floor above them, back and forth, as if someone was pacing. And when they radioed security to check, no one was ever found inside. The apartment remained locked, empty, and completely untouched. Yet the footsteps continued, always late at night, always the same steady rhythm. The manifestations evolved beyond the apartment as well. Cast members working closing shifts on Main Street began reporting a distinctive smell of cigar smoke in areas where smoking had always been prohibited. The scent would appear suddenly in backstage corridors or near the partner statue and around the railroad station, places where Walt was known to kind of sneak away for a quick smoke during his lifetime. The smell would linger for several minutes and then vanish completely, leaving no source and no trace. Security cameras occasionally malfunction near the firehouse as well, displaying strange interference or brief shadows that investigations could never explain. But the most compelling encounters came from cast members who actually saw him. In the early 1980s, a cast member named Ann Bees reported seeing Walt Disney multiple times throughout the park. Her most frequent sighting was near the Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln Theater, where she had seen a distinguished gentleman in a business suit leaning against a lamppost, smoking a cigar. He would smile and acknowledge her presence, and then fade away. She saw him in the apartment window, standing and looking down at his park as well. Other cast members reported similar encounters, always describing the same details. It was a man in 1960s business attire, always calm, always watching, always appearing in places that Walt had loved during his lifetime. A paranormal investigator visiting the park late at night in the 1990s did report seeing a figure near the castle who smiled and waved before slowly disappearing over approximately 20 seconds. The investigator was convinced that it was Walt Disney, and the pattern became pretty clear. Walt wasn't haunting Disneyland necessarily in a traditional sense. He was just still present, watching over his creation, still ensuring that his dream continued exactly as he'd envisioned. Cast members began to view his presence not as frightening at all, but as comforting. Uncle Walt, as they call him, had promised Disneyland would never be finished and that it would continue to grow and evolve. And as we know, it has. So hopefully, Walt is looking over his creation, enjoying all that it has become and how much it's growing. And those, my friends, are the mini hauntings at Disneyland in California. As far as I know, if I missed any, if you know of any, let me know and I'll mention it. I really loved researching this episode. It was very interesting. I love Disneyland. I don't care what anyone says. I'm a Disney adult and I will always enjoy it. Even if you don't like rides, the food's pretty good. I love Disneyland. And if you liked this episode, you should send it to a friend who loves Disney and all things spooky. This is right up their alley. And if you really liked it, you can rate the podcast with those little stars down there or up there, depending on where you're listening. You can leave a comment, write a review, tell me which one of these hauntings today you'd never heard of, or which one you would like to check out the next time you go to Disney. I know that the next time I go, I will be paying much closer attention to all of this. I want to bring my ghost hunting equipment with me. Do you guys think that they allow dowsing rods and REM pods inside Disney? Or no? Should I find out? Could you imagine? I walk into the park, they check my bag, and they're like, "Ma'am, what is this?" I'm like, "It's a REM pod." They're like, "You can't bring that in here. What's wrong with you?" I mean, I'm just trying to have a good time. I just want to get to know the ghosts. And if they know any tricks for, making those lines go faster, or if they have any discount codes I can use for food or tickets so that we don't have to take out a second mortgage to go to Disneyland. I love Disneyland, I do, but the scariest part for me about that park is the prices. You want me to pay $12 for water? Now I am deceased. Well, you guys, that is all I have for you today. If you decide to haunt somewhere in your afterlife, make sure it has churros. Stay spooky. And as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.